Ses.
You'll be great.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Yunus Emre Institute, where Turkish culture meets London. I'm Gülsüm. I'll be your host for tonight. It's an honor to welcome you all here, and of course, it's an honor to welcome Ayşe Gülnev Osmanoğlu and her family as well. Tonight's discussion is all about Miss Osmanoğlu's new book, A Farewell to Imperial Istanbul, a story told through the lens of a member of the Ottoman family. Miss Osmanoğlu will take us on a beautiful journey to the past to see Istanbul through the eyes of a prince. And following this talk, we will be offering books to buy at the back, as well as a book signing, a chance to meet Mrs. Osmanoğlu for yourselves and have a nice chat with her, and photos as well. And we'll also be offering refreshments. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Miss Osmanoğlu.
Hoş geldiniz, iyi akşamlar. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me on this October evening to hear about my new book, A Farewell to Imperial Istanbul, which was published earlier this year. I'd just like to start by thanking Mehmet Bey and everyone else at the Yunus Emre Institute, not only for all the incredible work they do to promote Turkish history, culture and language, but for their generous support of my writing and for organising and hosting this event and making us all feel so welcome tonight. So it's truly a pleasure to be here with you all, so thank you. The last time I was here at the Institute, I accompanied my father to celebrate the publication of the English translation of my grandfather's memoirs. Some of you may be familiar with Memoirs of an Ottoman Prince. I contributed a small section on the historical background, and this involvement gave me the confidence to pursue my own writing projects. But before we dive into the inspiration behind my journey as a self-published indie author and discuss the book itself, I've been asked to share a little about my roots and heritage and ancestry with you. So moving on, I'm not very good with this sort of thing, so it works. The main protagonist in A Farewell to Imperial Istanbul is my grandfather, His Imperial Highness Şehzade Ali Vasip Efendi. On this slide, you can see part of my family tree tracing my grandfather's lineage back to 1774 and the reign of Sultan Abdülhamid I. While we could easily trace it back much further, all the way to Sultan Osman I, who founded the Ottoman Empire in 1299, and even earlier to his father, Ertuğrul Gazi, and his grandfather, Süleyman Shah, I thought it would suit for this evening's purposes just to show this small section. Towards the top, you'll find Sultan Mahmud II, who ascended the throne in 1808, and his two sons, Sultan Abdülmecid and Sultan Abdülaziz. All members of the Ottoman family alive today are descended from one of these two brothers. The picture on the left is of Sultan Mahmud II. At the time of his accession to the throne, he was the sole surviving Ottoman prince. The future of the empire and the dynasty hung by a very precarious thread, One twist of fate could have meant that the empire came to an end, and it could have brought about the extinction of the imperial family, and I wouldn't be standing here this evening speaking with you. But fate was kind to him, and Mahmud II enjoyed a successful reign, ushering in sweeping reforms, modernising and westernising the empire. His efforts not only secured the empire's future for another century, but also guaranteed the survival of the imperial family. On the right is a portrait of his eldest son, Sultan Abdülmecid, who succeeded him. His descendants are known as the Mecidie branch of the family, while those descended from his younger brother, Sultan Abdülaziz, are referred to as Aziziyes. And as you can perhaps deduce from the tree, although it's very small writing, I apologise, I am a Mecidie. So I descend from Sultan Abdülmecid on the right. The last four sultans of the Ottoman Empire were brothers. They were all sons of Sultan Abdülmecid, and I'm privileged to claim descent from two of them. My grandfather, Ali Vasip Effendi, was the great-grandson of Sultan Murad V, while my grandmother, Emine Mukbile Sultan, was the granddaughter of Sultan Mehmed V, or also known as Sultan Reshad. My grandparents were therefore both second cousins, once removed, making my father the only Ottoman prince whose parents both descend directly from the dynasty. On this next slide, you can see portraits of my two great-grandfathers. On the left is Sultan Murad V, and on the right is his younger brother, Sultan Mehmed Reshad, who ruled during the First World War. Sultan Abdülmecid sought to continue his father's legacy of reform, and one key aspect of this was changing the dynasty's succession laws. At the time, the system was based on agnatic seniority, meaning the throne passed to the eldest male of the imperial bloodline. Sultan Abdülmecid wanted to adopt agnatic primogeniture, where the throne would pass from father to eldest son. He felt this would bring greater stability to the dynasty and align the Ottoman Empire with the other European ruling houses. But sadly, he died young, and before he could enact this change. So instead of his eldest son Murad succeeding him as he had intended, it was his brother, Sultan Abdülaziz, who came to the throne next. As the Muradiyeh princes were known to be advocates of radical reform, and because they supported the idea of establishing a constitutional monarchy, we can only wonder what different twists and turns history might have taken had Sultan Abdülmecid's reform of the succession laws been adopted. So the family tree in the centre shows the Muradiyeh branch of the Ottoman family, and towards the bottom, right at the bottom, you can see my name and those of my 5 children. If agnatic primogeniture had been introduced, the throne would have passed from Sultan Abdülmecid to Sultan Murad V, to Salahuddin Effendi, Ahmed Nihad Effendi, and eventually to my grandfather, Ali Vasip Effendi. My father would now be head of the dynasty, and if the House of Osman followed the recent example of other dynastic families by adopting absolute primogeniture, where the eldest child inherits regardless of gender, that honour would next pass to me. But of course, the question of equal rights for women in the Islamic world remains a complex issue, so while most European ruling houses may now have adopted absolute primogeniture, this is not something that is ever likely to be considered by my family. And I share these details only to illustrate my place within the family tree and to provide a clearer picture of my connection to what is often recognised as the senior branch of the Ottoman family. So I hope that background gives you a clearer picture of where and how I fit into my family tree. Now I thought it is Marlowe. Now I thought I'd just share a little bit about my childhood, education, and my own immediate family. So, as has already been guessed, I was born and raised in Marlow, which is a small market town in Buckinghamshire on the River Thames. After reading history and politics at the University of Exeter, I obtained a master's degree in Turkish studies from SOAS, University of London, where I specialised in Ottoman history. So people often ask me how I ended up living in England. Well, after my entire family was exiled from their homeland in 1924, my grandparents eventually settled in Nice, in the south of France. With the threat of impending war in Europe, they moved to Alexandria in Egypt, which is where my father was born and raised. After finishing school, he came to England to further his education, met my mother, who incidentally is of Greek origin, and decided to stay. So when I was born, my father and all Ottoman princes were still forbidden from entering Turkey. So my parents made the decision to raise their family here, and that's how I came to live here. Several other family members also live in the UK, although we're spread all around the globe. I have relatives in the United States, in Austria, France, Switzerland, some in Lebanon, which these days is a concern, the Gulf states, and also Turkey, now that it is finally permitted. So another question I'm often asked is, how does it feel to be a member of the Ottoman family? Well, I'm obviously incredibly proud of my heritage and humbled to know that the blood of Ottoman sultans and caliphs run in my veins. But this legacy hasn't always been easy to carry, especially during my childhood. Living in exile and growing up in a foreign land, assimilating into cultures that weren't my own, it's hard. It's very hard, as anybody who's experienced it would know well. I often felt like an outsider, never quite belonging. I can't pinpoint the exact moment I realised I was different, or when my father first told me about our family history, but I vividly remember the feelings of isolation. I was the only Muslim girl in school, the only child whose name no teacher could ever pronounce. And children can be cruel to those who are different, and so too can teachers, some teachers. And I learnt about prejudice at a young age, and it definitely left its mark on me. And this experience of prejudice has led me to reflect on the concept of generational trauma, the notion that our ancestors' pain can be passed down, subtly shaping our own destinies and identities. My grandparents endured real trauma due to their exile, and although I was born long after their displacement, I feel a part of their pain within me. And this connection enhances my understanding and deepens my empathy for those who have faced similar hardships, including the hundreds and thousands affected by the population exchanges between Turkey and Greece, the millions uprooted during the partition of India, and countless others fleeing conflict or persecution. Their experiences resonate with me, and I'm acutely aware of the lasting scars exile and displacement can leave on descendants. Tragically, we witness similar suffering today, and I'm sure, like all of you, I pray for the people of Gaza and Lebanon who are enduring displacement and unimaginable horror. And I fear for the future of the generations that will inherit their wounds. So for I know that time doesn't heal all these wounds. Some remain raw, and I feel this pain sometimes inside me, especially when the same two hurtful comments are hurled at me on social media. I always get, "You dishonour your ancestors by not speaking Turkish fluently. You should be ashamed. You don't look Turkish, and neither do your children." These words hurt because they touch on my own insecurities. I wasn't taught Turkish as a child. My father, grappling with his own frustrations in exile, didn't have the patience to teach me. Of course, I picked up a little from my grandparents and have taken a few language courses, but I'm not a natural linguist. And this does remain one of my biggest regrets in life. But I pray my ancestors can see beyond this obvious failing and recognise that I try to honour them in other ways. As for appearances, well, Allah created each of us as we are, so I make no apologies for how I or my children look. He alone determined the colour of our hair, our eyes, the shape of our features, and the shade of our skin. Our blood is Ottoman, our DNA is Ottoman, so I say no more on that. Yet the comments I receive from trolls still sting as they open up those old wounds. Growing up feeling different and living in exile have undoubtedly shaped who I am. However, instead of letting this affect me negatively, I've learnt to draw strength from it. It might have taken me 50 years to realise that being different is something to celebrate, but each of us carries a unique story, and that's what makes everyone so special. So in many ways, writing this book became a form of self-therapy, allowing me to process my family's experiences and heal wounds by sharing our story. So if I could speak to my younger self, I'd encourage her to embrace all the things that make her unique with pride, and I urge all of you to do the same. Embrace your story and find strength in what makes you different. By accepting and understanding our past, we can move forward into the future with hope. And this is a message I try to pass on to my children and hope to share with you all today. So that leads us nicely on to the next slide. So I met my husband Nick while we were both studying at Exeter University. He's here tonight, hiding in the back. And we recently celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary. So I can't believe how quickly the years have flown by. We're blessed to have 5 happy, healthy, beautiful children, 4 sons and 1 daughter. 3 of my boys are here tonight. And they bring great light and love to our lives. They're my everything. And being their mother and watching them grow into the amazing young adults they have all become has been my life's greatest joy. So now I'm embarrassing them. So another great joy of mine is, of course, the joy of writing. So writing has enabled me to connect with my roots and ancestors in ways I never imagined possible. It has not only been therapeutic, but also my way of honouring my family, bringing them out of the shadows of history and into the light of the page. And on this next slide, you can see photographs of the Muradiye princes. They are the central characters in my books. And it is through their eyes that I have aimed to capture the human experience during the final years of the Ottoman dynasty. On the far left is Salahuddin Effendi, the only son of Sultan Murad V. He is a key figure in my first book, The Gilded Cage on the Bosphorus. He died in 1915, shortly after the Allied invasion of Gallipoli, so does not feature in my recent book. In some ways, I feel a sense of relief that after all he suffered, having lived in enforced confinement at the Turan Palace for most of his life, that he was spared witnessing the empire's collapse and the exile from his homeland. Next to him is his eldest son, Ahmed Nihad Effendi, my great-grandfather. He is one of the main characters in A Farewell to Imperial Istanbul and also appears in my first book. Family, loyalty, duty and resilience are all dominant themes in both works, and these are all values that are embodied by Nihad Effendi. Beside him is his younger brother, Osman Fuad Effendi, shown here in the uniform of Commander-in-Chief of Ottoman forces in Tripolitania, a position he held during the last months of World War I. Osman Fuad Effendi is one of 3 imperial princes who served on the front lines during the war, and like his brother, he plays a significant role in both of the books. And at the end, lastly, we have my dede, my grandfather, Ali Vasib Effendi. The opening scene of The Gilded Cage on the Bosphorus describes the moment of his birth, while in A Farewell to Imperial Istanbul, he has matured into a young man nearing the end of his military training and ready and eager to serve the state. You may notice in these photographs that they all wear the imperial order of the dynasty, and all are dressed in military uniform. One of the indignities imposed by the nationalist government in late 1923 was the stripping of every Ottoman prince of their military rank and the right to wear these uniforms, a needless decision that I explore in detail in the book. So what inspired me to write this family saga, the Ottoman Dynasty Chronicles? Well, quite simply, I write because I want to give my ancestors their voice, and I want their story to finally be told. I grew up surrounded by family heirlooms, keepsakes, and faded black and white photographs, each one a silent guardian of secrets. To me, the photographs were never just portraits of distant relatives frozen in time, mere names on a family tree. I longed to break through that glass and reach beyond, and I wanted to understand the souls behind those searching eyes, to feel their emotions, and above all, to give a voice to those whom history had silenced. So I immersed myself in their world. As a child, I asked my grandfather endless questions, bombarded my grandmother with even more, and listened intently to my great aunts and uncles as they shared memories of a lost world. Each story filled me with pride in my family's history and ignited my determination to uncover more about life at the Imperial Ottoman court. I sought out first-hand accounts, reading my grandfather's memoirs and those of the Lady Filizen, one of Sultan Murad V's favourites. I read the memoirs of my namesake, Ayşe Sultan, daughter of Sultan Abdülhamid II, and Neslişah Sultan, granddaughter of the last Sultan and the last Caliph. My father's recollections, along with insights from others, also proved invaluable. Every conversation, each page I turned, offered precious fragments of their own lives. Fragments I squirreled away, knowing that one day I would weave them into a story of my own. And then a few years ago, I finally began to write. Much of the detail of daily life of the Ottoman family was not recorded and can't be found in libraries or archives. So where inevitable gaps appeared in the narrative, I did my best to bridge them using my imagination, a touch of informed guesswork, and a woman's natural intuition. This, I believe, is what makes historical fiction so engaging. When factual history runs dry and references are scarce, historical fiction steps in, allowing writers to slip into the shoes of their characters and inhabit their world. So this is what I've tried to do in my books, hopefully offering readers an immersive experience that keeps them turning the pages, leaving them with an understanding of what life in the Ottoman family might have been like. Now on this slide you can see some of the leading ladies who star in my books. Throughout history, narratives have typically been recorded by the victors, those in power, who more often than not are men. Much of what we learn as fact is a projection of their truth, a selective account that overlooks countless other voices and perspectives. And I firmly believe that the family unit, and women in particular, embody the heart and soul of many defining moments in history. Their lives and experiences providing some of the most captivating and inspiring material for storytelling. And in my books, it was important to me not only to give the women in my family a voice, but to honour the way they confronted their tragic fates, with unwavering inner strength, graceful dignity, and extraordinary perseverance. So let me introduce you to some of these remarkable women. So from left to right is Her Imperial Highness Princess Hatice Sultan, the eldest daughter of Sultan Murad V. In the gilded cage on the Bosphorus, her secret correspondence with her cousin's charismatic husband caused quite the scandal in 1904, with rumours of an affair spreading through the society salons of Istanbul. She also plays a supporting role in A Farewell to Imperial Istanbul. Next to her is her sister Fehime Sultan, affectionately known within the family as Kelebek Sultan, the butterfly princess. Her nickname reflects her natural charm, her love of fashion, and her tendency to flit from one elegant soirée to the next. Yet beneath her seemingly frivolous facade lay a fiercely patriotic woman and someone of remarkable courage. During the Allied occupation of Istanbul, Fehime Sultan became a masterful spy, gathering vital intelligence from the loquacious lives of foreign diplomats and officers and discreetly relaying it to Ankara. In the middle, we have Behiye Sultan, the eldest daughter of Salahuddin Effendi and sister to Nihat Effendi. She married Major General Hafuz Ismail Hakkı Pasha, one of the young Turk heroes of the 1908 revolution. She was a force to be reckoned with, intelligent, well-read, and unapologetically forthright. My grandfather adored her. She was his favourite aunt. And in A Farewell to Imperial Istanbul, we see him living with her in her konak in Ortaköy, sharing moments that highlight their close bond. Next is Adile Sultan, photographed here on her wedding day. Like her sisters, she features prominently in both books. Her daughter, Princess Nilüfer, appears as a young girl in A Farewell to Imperial Istanbul. She later marries the son of the Nizam of Hyderabad. This union spared them both from the financial hardships faced by most other members of the family during the long years of exile. Next to her is her sister, Rukiya Sultan, looking beautiful and very glamorous. She was a highly accomplished pianist and was married to Sharif Abdulmejid Haydar Pasha, the son of the last Ottoman Emir of Mecca. And finally on the right is a photograph of Safiru Hanım Efendi. She entered the imperial harem as a child and worked as a kalfa, which is a position similar to a housemaid, in the service of Sultan Murad V and later of Salahuddin Effendi. She caught the eye of my great-grandfather and became his first wife and the mother to my grandfather. With a gentle spirit, she embodied love and kindness, always holding a deep sense of reverence for the Ottoman family, yet remaining shy and always unassuming. So all of these photographs, except for the one of Behiye Sultan, were taken in Istanbul before the exile. The one of Behiye Sultan was taken a few months after the exile in Budapest. You might have noticed the style of the women's clothing, far more modern than one might expect perhaps. Contrary to popular belief, these Muradiye princesses were not typically veiled or constrained by the rigid traditions and protocols often associated with their time. Instead, they were educated and empowered to be strong, independent women, largely unconfined by the societal norms that existed outside the palace walls. It's important to recognise that the imperial family was far more progressive and liberal in their views than many of the more conservative elements of Ottoman society. The other motivation behind my writing is to ensure that the memories and recollections of my family are preserved for their descendants. So I was driven by several key questions. What responsibility do we have to ensure that history is remembered accurately? Why do certain historical narratives dominate over others, and who gets to decide which stories are told? Why are personal accounts of those affected by historical events often overlooked, and how can we ensure that their voices are heard in the future? What is lost when we forget the stories of those who came before us, and what is gained when we make an effort to remember and retell them? As I sought answers to these questions, my commitment to documenting my family's final years in Imperial Istanbul deepened. I felt compelled to share their experiences from their unique perspectives. By doing so, I hope to provide my children, their children, and generations beyond with a genuine connection to their heritage. I want them to feel proud of their roots and recognise the strength and resilience that has defined our family throughout history. So I love these two photographs. They're two of my favourites. They show my grandmother as a little girl with her father Ömer Hilmi Efendi, the youngest son of Sultan Reşad, and her younger brother Mahmud Namuk Efendi. These pictures serve as powerful reminders of the familial ties that transcend generations and inspire my commitment to preserving our family's memory. So, driven by the desire to honour my ancestors and instill pride in my 5 children, I began writing the Ottoman Dynasty Chronicles, a family saga about Sultan Murad V and his descendants. I wrote the first words of my first book, The Gilded Cage on the Bosphorus, almost exactly 8 years ago, on October the 13th, 2016, the 113th anniversary of my grandfather's birth. And then this March, I completed A Farewell to Imperial Istanbul, commemorating the centenary of my family's exile. This book is intended as a personal tribute to every member of the House of Osman who faced adversity with dignity and grace as they forged new lives in foreign lands. The idea for these books had been in my mind probably for about 40 years, but I never felt the time was quite right to start writing before. Real life just took over. First there was school, university, then work, a business to run. I gave birth to 5 children in 6 years, which left me with little time to do anything else. However, I promised myself that one day, when my children started to fly the nest, that I would dedicate time to this passion of mine, and I kept that promise. In many ways, I wish I had started earlier, but in others, I believe that the waiting has made me a better writer. I've gained life experience, and that probably reflects in my work. Also, I don't believe it's healthy to live with regrets. So throughout the years spent working on both books, I felt my grandparents' presence. I know it sounds strange, but sometimes when I had a writer's block or felt uncertain about what to write next, I sensed their guidance almost as if they were whispering in my ear the words I needed to use, ensuring their story is faithfully recorded for future generations. I can only hope I have honoured their memory with the respect and sensitivity that they deserve. So when I first started writing, I never imagined I'd become a self-published author. Initially, I intended my book to be read only by my children and extended family. But after my father read the manuscript, he suggested I publish it. My husband and daughter also encouraged me to publish, and eventually I thought, well, why not? It was 2020, the world was in lockdown, and like many, I found myself with an empty diary and a lot of free time. So I took some online courses, watched YouTube videos on self-publishing, and dived headfirst into the process. The learning curve was steep, but it was exciting. I even built my own author website from scratch, and given my total lack of technical skills, if I can do it, then anyone can. I formatted the book, collaborated with a cover designer, and on the 30th of May, the anniversary of Sultan Murad V's accession to the throne, I released my first book, The Gilded Cage on the Bosphorus, and suddenly I was an indie author, and my book was out in the world. Holding that first copy was such an emotional moment. Seeing my words and my ancestors' stories bound together in the pages of the book was surreal, like a lifetime dream had come true. But it was also a little scary to open the doors to my family's private world like that. However, every positive review or supportive message from a reader makes me smile. Knowing my books have touched the hearts of strangers and that people around the world have connected with the stories brings a joy I never anticipated. Of course, not everyone has loved them, and negative reviews can be hard to read at times, but I've learnt to ignore the hateful comments and embrace the constructive criticism. Next, I worked with a lovely translator to get The Gilded Cage on the Bosphorus translated into Turkish. My father's wife kindly edited it, and soon after, Boğaz'daki Altın Kafes was on the bookshelves. And the thought that Turkish readers could now enjoy my story was another surreal moment. After that, I began researching my second book, A Farewell to Imperial Istanbul, which I also self-published. The freedom of being an indie author means no pressure or deadlines and allows me to write the stories I want to tell. Self-publishing also gives me total creative control, from the first draft to the final edit. It's incredibly fulfilling to oversee every step of my book's journeys, determining the cover design, the formatting style, and the publication and marketing strategy. Now, with A Farewell to Imperial Istanbul also out in the world, I'm rather proud of what I've accomplished as an indie author. But that being said, writing can be lonely. Hours spent at my desk researching, drafting, editing, or staring at a blank page waiting for inspiration to strike can feel isolating. Thankfully, I've been fortunate to be part of an incredible indie author community, which has provided immense support. Being an indie author isn't about working alone, it's about being part of a network of writers where we cheer each other on, share tips, celebrate one another's successes, and offer support. This community has been absolutely wonderful, and I've made some very lovely friends along the way. But of course, I sometimes imagine the benefits of a traditional publishing house being behind me, working with a team, learning from their expertise, and assessing their marketing resources. I know my books would be stronger with that kind of support, but who knows, maybe one day my books will catch the eye of a publisher. But for now, I'm embracing the freedom and creativity of being an indie author. For me, this journey is more about embracing my family's history than publishing books. It's about preserving history, honouring my ancestors, and sharing their stories with the world. Through this process, I've discovered my unique voice as an author, and it's been a rewarding journey to learn how to use it effectively. So, what can I tell you about A Farewell to Imperial Istanbul? Well, the book is set against the magnificent backdrop of Istanbul, soon after the end of the First World War, a period of momentous upheaval. As the Ottoman Empire collapses, so too do the fortunes of the House of Osman and their imperial capital. It's a story of family, loyalty and survival during the final days of the Ottoman Empire. In A Farewell to Imperial Istanbul, the imperial family is destined to experience the trauma of exile from their homeland, the very land their ancestors fought so hard to conquer. We witness events primarily through the eyes of the Muradiye branch of the Ottoman family, particularly my grandfather, Ali Vasip Effendi. Through his perspective, we experience the personal struggles and resilience of those trying to hold on to their disintegrating world. Istanbul itself plays a central role in the book, almost as if it's a character in its own right. Its grand imperial mosques and palaces stand strong against the changing tides of history, even as the city loses its imperial status and the capital of the new Republic of Turkey moves to Ankara. Now, on this slide, you can see images of the imperial palaces, the beautiful buildings that provide the setting for much of the story. Each palace has its own unique tale, yet they all share one thing. They witness the end of an era. The book opens at the Yıldız Palace, which is this one. It works. And the once mighty Ottoman Empire has crumbled, and the fate of the imperial family hangs in the balance. The Turkish War of Independence has just ended, and the nationalist government has abolished the Ottoman Sultanate, ending over 6 centuries of Ottoman rule. In this opening scene, Sultan Vahdettin bids a sorrowful farewell to his family as he prepares to flee the city under the cover of darkness, early on a cold November morning. The Dolmabahce Palace, up at the top, this also features prominently. It was here that the last Caliph of Islam, Abdülmecid Effendi, takes up residence after the departure of his cousin Sultan Vahdettin. Some scenes are joyful, depicting large family gatherings and intimate moments, and others are historic and poignant, such as when the Caliph is informed of the exile order issued by Ankara and is told he must leave the country immediately. Then there is Topkapı Palace. This is the Baghdad pavilion here. So this is the old palace, the former residence of the Ottoman sultans, and the bastion, and the once bastion of global Ottoman power and dominance. One of the book's most spiritual moments occurs here. Caliph Abdülmecid goes into the inner courtyard of the palace and enters the pavilion of the Holy Mantle and the sacred relics to assume the role of defender of the faithful and guardian of the holy relics of Islam. Afterwards, the ceremony of the Oath of Allegiance takes place in front of the Gate of Felicity, where he receives the allegiance of his family and subjects, just as sultans before him had done since the conquest of Istanbul. Çırağan Palace, my family home, with its towering iron gates, was the home of the Muradiye family for decades, their gilded cage on the Bosphorus. In A Farewell to Imperial Istanbul, the family now only occupies the harem building, while the charred remains of the main palace and its salamlik gardens have been requisitioned by the French army and are being used as barracks during the Allied occupation of the city. In one scene, my grandfather and his uncle Osman Fuad Effendi sneak into the grounds to observe French soldiers packing supplies and dismantling their tents after the signing of the Treaty of Lausanne, which formally ended the First World War and brought an end to Allied occupation of Istanbul. In A Farewell to Imperial Istanbul, the palaces serve not just as magnificent backdrops, but as living relics, filled with the whispers of my ancestors' stories. They provide a tangible connection to the past, transforming history into something that can be felt and touched. Walking through their corridors and gazing out over the Bosphorus from the same windows my ancestors once did, surrounded by the ghosts of the past, the characters in my books truly came to life in my mind, evolving from distant or abstract figures into real, complex individuals, full of emotion and humanity. And in that moment, the boundary between history and fiction, between fact and imagination, began to blur. And for me, this is the magic of historical fiction. What captivates me most about writing historical fiction is its power to transport me, and hopefully my readers too, back in time, allowing us to experience the past as if we were there. Whether immersing in the splendour of a palace salon or witnessing the farewell of a dynasty in the last caliph's study, historical fiction transforms us from passive observers into active participants, engaging with history on a personal level. For me, the true privilege lies in inhabiting these moments, feeling the significance of each character's experience, and sharing that with my readers. Together, we step into the shoes of those who lived before us, and are reminded that history is not just a series of dates and events, but the essence of human experience, where emotions transcend time, and their world becomes ours, even if only for a moment through the page. So, as I've already mentioned, A Farewell to Imperial Istanbul was published to commemorate the centenary of the exile of the Ottoman Imperial family. While the book recounts the end of an empire and the fall of an imperial dynasty, at its heart it's a story about family. It serves as a deeply personal homage to my grandparents, a way to mark the 100 years that have passed since that day in March 1924, when the entire imperial family was forced into exile from their homeland. The book covers a short but pivotal period in history from November 1922 to March 1924. During this time, I highlight many historical events leading up to the exile. I've included some images on this slide to show just a few of these scenes that are mentioned in the book. I know that I've touched on this before, but there is the departure of Sultan Vahdettin from the Yıldız Palace on the 17th of November 1922. Fearing for his life, the safety of the women in his harem, and the threat of civil war, he accepted help from General Harrington, commander of the Allied occupation forces, to flee aboard the British ship HMS Malaya, bound for Malta. And this marked the end of his reign as the last Ottoman Sultan. I also examine the role of Abdülmecid Efendi, whose actions may have inadvertently contributed to the abolition of the caliphate and the exile of the imperial family. Here you can see a photograph of him riding a white horse during the Salam Look, the ceremonial procession to the mosque for Friday prayers. By embracing all the pomp and circumstance of a sultan, Abdülmecid garnered the ire of Ankara's leaders, setting in motion the eventual dissolution of his spiritual office. Another interesting event I mention in the book is a football match that was held on the 29th of June 1923 at Taksim Stadium, formerly the Taksim Artillery Barracks. Frustrated by orders to evacuate Istanbul, General Harrington challenged the Turks to a football match, intent on asserting British superiority. But Fenerbahce Football Club had other ideas. They accepted this challenge. And in this photograph, you can see my grandfather and his cousin Ömer Faruk Efendi sitting with the team. Both princes watched the match and were there to witness Fenerbahce's amazing 2-1 victory, much to General Harrington's dismay, as he had anticipated a very comfortable win. The formal end of the Allied occupation came on the 2nd of October 1923, when the last of the occupying forces sailed away from Istanbul. This image here shows the Allied battleships anchored in the Bosphorus, a sight that humiliated the Turks and stirred deep resentment. In my book, I explore the political undercurrents of the Treaty of Lausanne, the tragic consequences of the population exchange between Turkey and Greece, and the immense relief and jubilation that swept through Istanbul when the occupation finally ended. In this very blurry picture here at the bottom, you see a historic moment from the night of the 4th of March 1924, when Caliph Abdülmecid boarded the Orient Express at Çatalca railway station to begin his life in exile in Switzerland. He was accompanied by his son and daughter and wives. I tried hard to capture the sorrow and poignancy of this historic departure with words alone, but It wasn't easy, and I hope I've conveyed something of the tragedy of the moment. And lastly, this newspaper clipping reports on the exile order and features 5 young Ottoman princes. In the centre is Ömer Faruk Efendi, the son of Caliph Abdülmecid. To his right is to his left is my grandfather, and to his right is Ibrahim Tevfik. On either end are 2 sons of Sultan Abdülhamid II, Mehmed Burhanuddin Efendi and Hayri Efendi. At the time, the press ran a vicious campaign to discredit members of the imperial family, printing vile and slanderous lies in the newspaper. The stories were spread to tarnish their reputation and diminish the influence and standing of these popular princes in the eyes of the public. So A Farewell to Imperial Istanbul is more than just a chronicle of historic events. It's my attempt to evoke the human story lying beneath the surface of history. This is where the process of writing historical fiction comes in, blending research, imagination, and intuition. In historical fiction, the narratives of history and fiction run parallel to each other, sometimes intersecting, sometimes diverging. However, I find that the raw material of history is so compelling that straying far from fact is rarely necessary. So research forms the backbone of my writing process, providing the essential framework on which my stories are built. This begins with examining key events, dates, and figures of the time, where I read biographies, historical texts, and newspaper articles to gather as much information as possible. Once the material is swirling in my mind, I let it marinate, and gradually the characters and plot take shape. But research is only the skeleton of my stories. After I've gathered the facts, I begin to outline the story, then I breathe life into my characters by envisaging their world. As questions arise, like what did they eat at a family dinner in the palace, who scored the winning goal in the Harrington Cup football match, what time did the train leave Sirkeci railway station carrying members of the Ottoman family into exile? Well, I would want to answer these, and I want to get the details right, so I dive straight back into my research, looking for the answers, because these small details really matter. So visiting the sites I write about is also an essential part of my writing process. Spending hours in a mosque, watching boats on the Bosphorus, or wandering through the streets of Istanbul allows me to absorb the essence of the city. This faithful connection to Istanbul and to its past is vital as I strive to weave personal narratives into the broader fabric of history, inviting my readers to connect to the characters and their lives. With all that said, I hope I've given you a glimpse of what to expect from A Farewell to Imperial Istanbul, and I hope I've tempted you to journey back in time to 1920s Istanbul, where through my writing I can introduce you to my family and their world. So I'd also just like to mention that originally I planned to launch A Farewell to Imperial Istanbul on the 6th of March. It was on this day in 1924 that both my grandparents and many members of the imperial family boarded the Orient Express at Sirkeci railway station and began their journey into exile. However, as the final edits of my book weren't quite ready, I had to choose a new release date. And I selected the 29th of May, a date that every Turk knows is of immense importance in our history. As for those of you who don't know, it's the date that in 1453 my ancestor Sultan Mehmed II conquered Constantinople, transforming it into the capital of the Ottoman Empire. So this felt symbolic to me. My story chronicles the events that led to Istanbul no longer being the capital of the Turkish state, or the home of the descendants of its great conqueror. So releasing my book on the anniversary of my family's greatest triumph felt like a fitting tribute to both the rise and fall of an extraordinary empire. Now that was nearly 5 months ago now, and it's been a bit of a whirlwind since. I'm thrilled, though still a little bit in disbelief, to share that A Farewell to Imperial Istanbul launched as the top new release in not 1, but 3 Amazon categories: historical Middle Eastern fiction, history of Turkey and the Ottoman Empire, and historical World War I fiction. While these categories may be rather niche, seeing my book baby top those charts was rather amazing. So the outpouring of love and support for the book has surpassed my wildest expectations, and I'm extremely grateful to everyone who has purchased, read, and taken the time to review my book. People like your mother. As a self-published indie author, gaining visibility can feel like an uphill battle. The publishing world is vast and often overwhelming, especially when you're trying to carve out a space for your work without the backing of a traditional publisher. So to see A Farewell to Imperial Istanbul so well received has been incredible. And it's given me the confidence and motivation to continue writing, to keep telling stories that reflect not only my family history, but also the rich legacy of the Ottoman Empire. And I hope my books will continue to interest readers. And just to end, I thought I would close by reading a very short extract from A Farewell to Imperial Istanbul. And the scene I've chosen comes from the final chapter. And I've chosen it because it features both my grandparents. It's based on a story that my grandmother once shared with me. And I'll do my best to keep it together as I read, but I get a bit emotional even thinking about what they went through. She was a little girl, only 12 years old at the time, and my grandfather was a young man of 20. And the scene is set in the dining car of the Orient Express, just after the train has pulled away from Sikeci railway station, carrying most of the imperial family out of Istanbul and into exile. So let's try and do this without getting emotional. Vasib's attention was drawn to Mukbile, who clutched a glass jar filled with what appeared to be soil. "What do you have there, Princess Mukbile?" Vasib inquired, his curiosity aroused. Her emerald green, almond-shaped eyes met his, and she responded with a simplicity that charmed everyone at the table. "It is a little part of our homeland, Prince Vasib." Mukbile had taken the soil from the flower bed outside her bedroom window, where beautiful yellow roses, her mother's favourite flowers, blossomed every year. "So that wherever I go, I will never feel completely homesick," she concluded, her words bearing a maturity and wisdom beyond her years. Vasib watched as Ömer Hilmi, Mukbile's father, paused momentarily, a proud smile crossing his face as he glanced at his daughter before continuing down the carriage to find his table. Outside, the train picked up speed, carrying them further from the city as it steamed towards the border. So that brings me to the end of my talk, and I just would like to thank you all for your time and attention and for coming out on a Thursday evening. I hope you found the presentation interesting, and perhaps it's inspired you to explore more about this fascinating chapter of Turkish history, or perhaps even plan a trip to Istanbul to visit some of the places mentioned in my books. And I have brought along a few copies and be more than happy to sign any of them if anyone was interested. But I think the idea is to have some Q&As.
Yeah, so if anyone has any questions.
If you have any questions, I will try to answer them, as long as they're not too tricky. Or political. I won't get into anything political.
Hi. I was wondering. I was wondering how much of this book is historical fiction, and how much of it is more historical non-fiction?
So every scene is pretty much based on fact, so it's history. But to pad it out and to, as I mentioned in my talk, to sort of add a bit of life to the characters, that's where the historical fiction comes in. So every major event, whether it's the football match or whether it's a dinner at Dolmabahce Palace, there's a scene where all the family are brought together by the last caliph and they have a dinner. And even down to the food that they're eating is fact, because my grandfather kept the menus. So the detail is pretty much sticking to the truth. And as I said in my presentation, history is so amazing that you don't really need to go off track and to make up stories. But you do have to use your imagination when it comes to feelings, emotions, the clothes, certain things like that. but pretty much every event, every scene, every single character, all the servants, the names are the names of the servants in the palaces. Literally, you know, that detail's there, and that is history.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much for this beautiful talk. I'm so mixed with emotions, sadness and pride at the same time, and I really feel sorry for what our ancestors had to go through, your ancestors. I want to ask a couple of questions. One, do you know where this jar of soil is at the moment?
Yes, when my grandmother was allowed back into Turkey, the women were allowed back in 1952. So before the men were allowed to return, I'll get upset, but she put it on her grandmother's grave. So, and on her mother's grave, yeah, she brought it home.
And the next one is, you said you are spread around the world. Do you ever get together?
Well, unfortunately, it doesn't happen very often because, as I say, some people are as far away as the United States and then in the Gulf, and cousins in Lebanon, which is a concern. But we did all get together about 18 years ago, and I know that sounds like a really long time, but it was very special. It was at Dolmabahce Palace, and it was organised by TRT. They had just done a documentary on the exile and where we all were. So they had organised for us all to get together into one place, and that was really very special. But that was all branches of the family, people I hadn't even met. And interestingly, some members of the family can't even speak to other members because they don't speak the same language. You know, we have some living in Austria who only speak German. I don't speak German. So a lot of smiles and a lot of hugs go on to communicate, but that's one of the sort of tragedies of the exile, is that everybody sort of went different to different countries. But there are certain thank you. There are certain branches that are closer than others, and you know, I see a lot of the Muradiye branch and some of the Reshad branch, obviously, because that's where I come from, and I'm close to some of my Hamidiya cousins too. So there's no, it's just who you are able to see rather than, I have two cousins who come from Sultan Abdulaziz who I've never met because they didn't come to the Dolmabahce event, and they live in the Gulf, and they only speak Arabic, so I wouldn't be able to communicate with them anyway, but yeah, that is the great tragedy. But sadly, one of my aunts recently died, and Fazile Hanım Sultan, and she had her funeral 2 weeks ago in Istanbul, and a lot of people gathered there from all over. So there are occasions when we get together. But
so she's been buried there?
She's been buried, yeah, next to her mother. Yeah.
A quick comment and a question, if I may. Firstly, about the soil. It's not just a Turkish or Ottoman thing, because I just recently finished translating a book by Fırat Sunel, who's a diplomat, actually, in India, and it's been published, and it's about the aftermath of the exchange. So the Rums come back to Sazak, which is now a derelict village, depleted village, and they take a handful of soil to take back because their mothers have asked for it. So it's so the Rums and us, we're the same people, in my humble opinion. That was my comment.
Similar soul.
Yeah. Question is, having done all this work and all this study, are you now tempted to write speculative fiction? As in, what if that butterfly's wing had flickered the other way?
I have thought about it, so I want to finish this saga that I'm writing, and A Farewell to Imperial Istanbul was written for the centenary, so I need to go back and write the sequel to The Gilded Cage on the Bosphorus and fill in the gaps between when that finished, which was 1905, up to 1922. When that's done, if I have time, God willing, inshallah, I have actually thought, and my husband put the idea into my head of a what if story, and the what if story that I would think about would be what if Sultan Abdülmecid had changed the laws of succession? What if Sultan Murat had come to the throne on the death of his father? Because he was a very liberal prince, and I think if Turkey had been given the opportunity, or if the Ottoman Empire had been given the opportunity to be a constitutional monarchy for longer, to get it more firmly established, more embedded into its sort of fabric, whether it could have survived. Not the empire, but the sort of essence of constitutional monarchy. So that would be the what if story, which I have thought about. So maybe.
I look forward to it.
That's my what if.
Good, thank you.
I normally stand up when I ask a question. I know that some members of the dynasty are moving to Egypt, moving to Nice. They did have a very sad story to complete until the end of their lives. Are you at all thinking of perhaps writing what happened afterwards?
Afterwards, to a point, perhaps. Again, another of, I want to get this up to the 1924 sequels done. But perhaps up to the sort of outbreak of World War II would be a good place to end, I think, because after that it's people, the next generation are being born outside Turkey. So like my father, he was born in 1940. So I think that between 1924 and 1940 was very, very difficult for a lot of members of my family, and I don't know how much people are aware, but we weren't like the Austrians or the Germans or the Romanovs. We didn't have Swiss bank accounts. We didn't have money squirreled away somewhere. We didn't take treasures out of our country. We thought that the exile would be really short, and people took two suitcases. They were given a year to sell their assets before it got seized by the state. And those assets got sold for a fraction of their worth. They got swindled by the people who were acting on their behalf, and they ended up with nothing. So they lived in abject poverty, and the stories are terribly, terribly sad of people who I still don't really understand why they were exiled. I mean, you take the example of Germany, the Kaiser was exiled, the Crown Prince was exiled, and that was it. And the Crown Prince was invited back within 2 or 3 years and given his palaces back. And the Kaiser was invited back, and he's the one who decided not to go back. In our case, every single Şehzade, that's Imperial Prince, every single Sultan, Imperial Princess, every single Hanım Sultan, that's daughter of a princess, every single Sultanzade, that is the son of a princess, were exiled, along with their spouses. So the exile was huge. It was 157 people were sent into exile. And Sabiha Sultan, the daughter of Sultan Abdülmecid, was 80 years old. I mean, the need to exile her, the threat to the state, I can't quite comprehend. It was extreme, it was ruthless, it was vindictive. And although I understand the reasons for a complete separation, because our case was slightly different, because in the case of Austria and Germany and Russia, there were revolutions from the bottom up. The people spoke, and in Turkey that wasn't the case. It was essentially a military coup, and the people woke up to be told, your caliph has left and the imperial family are on a train and leaving the country. It wasn't a revolution. So I understand the need for the state who have almost erased us all, and couldn't, no trace could be left of us for reasons of stability. But I'm proud of how my family behaved. They all left without argument because, and I asked my grandfather this question, and he asked the elders when he was young the question, why did we leave so willingly? Or not willingly, but without a fight. And it was to prevent civil war, plain and simple. And Turkey had been at war since 11 you could go back, Balkan Wars, wars in Libya, then the First World War, then the Turkish War of Independence. And selflessly they put the people first, the state first. And, you know, unlike the Russians, there was no white Russians against the communists. We just didn't, we'd seen that as an example. And we didn't want our people to suffer, so we left. And it was them who suffered. So, yeah, you're right. There were tragic stories, but some are quite personal, so I probably wouldn't want to share it with everyone, what people had to go through, because that's their sort of, I wouldn't want to impose on their privacy of what they had to suffer. So maybe I wouldn't like that. But it is heartbreaking.
Do we have any other questions?
Thank you for your amazing talk. It was very interesting to listen. I'm actually more curious about like the psychological part of something as traumatic as like an exile from a country. And I'm not like from Turkey, from Azerbaijan, and my family has also suffered. Like when you have Russian invasion, you can be part of a lord family and then have all your assets seized within one day and have your grandfather shot in front of your eyes. And this kind of like tragic incidents, like they have a way of imprinting even someone like 4 generations, 5 generations later, where you kind of feel this fear of death, fear of like power, or fear of being seen, or like in opposing way, maybe there is some sort of like a positive skill you have inherited. Like what's your perspective on this?
Well, I sort of touched on that in the talk, the sort of idea of generational trauma, and I think it's a real thing, and it's sort of been proved by scientists that it's a real thing. So I'm sorry that you and your family had to go through a similar pain, and it sounds like a lot worse pain if you had members of your family shot. We were very fortunate. None of us were shot or murdered as your family experienced. So I'm sorry that you had to go through that. But yes, it is a real thing, and you need to find your way to deal with it, and never think that it's not a thing to address. It is a thing. It is real. And for me, writing my books has really helped me, because it's sort of, you know, in some ways our family were vilified and were sort of created to be these traitors that we obviously we weren't. And so for me, writing my books has been to put their point across, and that's helped sort of put some of those ghosts to bed. So I hope you find a way to do something similar. So, but I don't know what else to suggest, but for me, writing really helped.
I mean, that's really nice to see and hear.
Do we have any other questions? Yeah, of course.
Sorry, I'm just gonna, you know, you said you've done a lot of research about your background and your family tree. So if, say, the Turkey invited all the royalty back, where in line is your family at the moment? I mean, I see you got some shehzades.
Well, that's not going to happen.
We don't know that.
That won't happen. It won't happen. And they're not shehzades, they're sultanzades.
Okay, yeah, they're royalties.
But where we are, well, the head of the family at the moment is Harun Effendi, who is a descendant from Sultan Abdul Hamid. And the crown prince, in effect, is my father. Because in our system, as I mentioned in the talk, the current system is that the head of the family passes to the eldest male member of the dynasty, irrespective of, you know, not father to son, brothers, cousins, it goes across. And it used to be father to son up to, I've got it written down, up to 1617. So and interestingly, when the dynasty was its most powerful and on the rise, it was father to son. And when they changed the system in 1617 was when the empire started going downhill. So maybe there's something in that we should think about changing the system back. But yes, so if you're asking where are we now, Harun Effendi is the head of the family, and my father, being the next oldest, is effectively the crown prince. Sorry?
The what if, to just echo my husband, is the what if you would be Sultan, Imperial Sultan. And
well, do you know what? They stripped us of everything. The state took everything from us, but they can't take who we are. So I am the Sultan, just am. So that's not gone. So it's not like it would be something new. And interestingly, when I have met, for example, Ahmed Davutoglu, who's a great admirer of our family, and he addresses us with all our titles, and I'm Ayşe Sultan to him. So to people who have a certain respect for the family, we still have those titles. And recently, the Turkish government have allowed our family to open court cases to get back some sort of compensation for some of the stolen land, not imperial property, but sort of personally owned things, so smaller things, farms and that sort of thing. So, the doors have been opened for that, but times are changing. But I don't think they'll go that far. They won't go that far. The Republic of, it's actually been very successful, and my father's won a lot of his court cases, and that's what he does now, and that's how he lives, on money that finally has trickled through. A fraction of what it's worth, but it's something, and it's a nice gesture by the state to allow that to happen, really.
Just a quick one.
Yeah.
So your books are already very popular with people I know in Turkey. I think this summer I took a copy of Farewell to Imperial Istanbul with me. It's already changed hands like 10 times. So everybody keeps asking me when it might be available in Turkey. So any plans for translation or being widely available?
Well, the problem is I'm an indie author, so I do this myself. So all these books that are here, I got them printed myself, and I put them in a bag and brought them here. I have no publisher behind me. I have nobody to... if I had somebody in Turkey who said to me, I can publish these books, I'll print them and I'll get them into bookshops, I would say, great, fantastic, let's do it tomorrow. But I don't have any contacts like that, and nobody has come forward and offered that. So if they did, I'd say, of course, because I'd love it to be translated into Turkish. I mean, much more than having English readers read my book. I want Turkish people to read the book and to really understand what the family went through, why they made decisions, why they left quietly, what their feelings were at the time during the occupation, and much more than the English-speaking world. But for me, it hasn't happened yet. But maybe one day, inshallah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ayşe Sultan. It's a fantastic presentation and also very moving. Sorry for some time you had to revisit your trauma. Thank you again for accepting our invitation and talking about your book. And I believe the attendees enjoyed the presentation. And now I think we can move on to next stage, and so we can take you there and sign your copies, and also people can enjoy the Turkish delicacies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Çok teşekkür ederim. Teşekkür ederim.
You can take this one out and you can be relieved. Sure. Thank
Çok
you.
teşekkür ederim.